Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Lieutenant General Bill LaCourie.
Good morning, Guardians! Hippie, I think you found the wrong conference to start. I didn't get you your pom-poms. Hey, it is great to see at least the front row, but I know there's all the way to the back. Everyone's there. It's great to be here for Spacepower number 2. And it is a day, or 3 days worth of a packed agenda of highly relevant topics, distinguished lists of guests and luminaries that are here to talk to you about the things that you want to hear about, the things that we need to talk about. And the greatest thing about this conference is we get to focus on exactly what we need and want to talk about. So in a second, we're going to bring out General Saltzman to kick this thing off. But I'm about to do probably the highest risk activity that I have done 31 years of space operations. Kind of do a little bit call of an audible. General Saltzman asked me if I would introduce the, I'll call it a happy birthday video for all of you. So in front of all of this group, I'm going to ask if we can roll a video, please.
Today we acknowledge the 5th anniversary of the U.S. Space Force. With pride, we celebrate this milestone. But our legacy extends far beyond these 5 years. From the early days of World War I, when intelligence was collected with hot air balloons, to the Gulf War, when GPS guided our forces, to now, and the cutting-edge satellites orbiting our planet today. Space control, global mission operations, and assured space access, and this increasingly contested warfighting domain, it's important now more than ever that Guardians play their part in victory. Look at your daily life. Whether it's through GPS guiding your travels, the satellite signals powering your entertainment, or enabling the mobile devices that keep you connected, it's safeguarded by us, the Guardians. So as we celebrate our 5 years of service, know that we'll always be there, serving and securing our nation's interest in, from, and to space.
All right, with that, if you could please stand up and give a warm welcome to your second Chief of Space Operations, General Chance Saltzman.
All right. Please sit down, come on. This is awesome. Good morning. Yeah, these are good pitchmen to get things hyped up here in the morning. I like it. I am excited to be here. Guardians, December, Orlando. This is, as we race towards our 5th birthday, this is tremendous. It's just a real honor to be here. This is where I want to be at this time of year for the rest of my career. It's just a great family feeling to be amongst people dedicated and focused on the Space Force. So thanks for being here. It says, note from speechwriters, insert joke here. Wasn't supposed to read that. I really do need better speechwriters. If anybody's interested. All right, how about this? Where do bad rainbows go? Prism. Well, it's a light sentence, but they do get time to reflect. See, so, this is the kind of warm-hearted love I've come to appreciate from this crowd. Thanks, Bill, for that kind introduction. I've known Bill for a very, very, very long time. We've known each other in good times and bad. He's seen me at my best and worst, and that's why he's the only friend that I have asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So I'm pretty comfortable about the chat we're going to have. Thanks so much to the Space Force Association. This is the 2nd annual Spacepower Conference, and it's such a pleasure to have a forum dedicated to the Space Force and to military space. We so rarely get the chance to talk amongst ourselves in such large numbers. So let's take this opportunity and learn from each other, share ideas, form connections. That's what events like this are all about, and I think Bill said that very well at the beginning. And this could not come at a better time. As fall becomes winter, the days grow shorter, nights stretch longer. It's traditional to gather with friends and family, consider what lies ahead, and reflect on what has come before. And with the Space Force preparing for its 5th birthday, I find myself feeling particularly reflective. 5 years, what a truly incredible milestone. When you're hiking up a mountain, it's easy to just focus on taking one step after another, to fixate on where you're going, and to some degree lose sight of where you've been. It's only when you pause to look back that you truly take stock of just how far you've come. But now imagine a mountain without a summit, a journey without an end. That's where we're headed, the unknown. You see, you can't win history. You can't arrive at destiny. The future just unfolds. But these unknowns do not relieve us of a responsibility to be ready for any and all challenges that we might face. So what we do is build foundations, solid foundations in our people, our processes, and our structures. And these foundations must form the base of us to grow in any number of ways to do what must be done. So that's what we've been doing, building foundations. Now, when you stop to consider a mansion, the foundation and its elements are mostly unseen, like the cinder blocks, the plumbing, the electricity providing structural integrity, flexible utility. These offer little to curb appeal, and they will be costly, time-consuming, and mostly invisible to outsiders when complete. But they are critical to the outcome. That is what we've been building. And I don't care if the outsiders don't see these things. I'm extremely proud of where we are and what we've accomplished. So let's take stock. Now, when Bill LaCourie and I joined the Space Force, we numbered less than 100 Guardians. 86 of those were newly minted second lieutenants. We had a shoestring budget and a mountain of work to do. Today, the military and civilian personnel serving the Space Force total nearly 15,000. Now, if you average that out, we're talking about tripling in size every year for 5 straight years. This is an unheard of, monumental administrative feat for any government organization. We should not lose sight of the amount of effort it takes to triple an organization every year. The scale is enormous. At its establishment, the Space Force was the first new American military service in 72 years. All the processes, policies, and mechanisms necessary to build a service from the ground up had long been forgotten. We had to relearn and rebuild so many things that other services just take for granted now. It's easy for outsiders to oversimplify these tasks, to critique the speed of our efforts, to undervalue the strides we're making. That's okay. That's always the case with external critics and armchair quarterbacks. But don't listen to them. We insiders know our challenges and how well we've addressed them. And it was more than just people and administrative work. We have absorbed and become singularly responsible for missions without which the Joint Force would fail. Satellite communications, missile warning, weather, position navigation and timing. And sometimes those missions came with people, and sometimes we had to grow them ourselves. We stood up field commands, activated service components, built out institutions for the design, development, generation, and employment of space forces. We've doubled our budget since we became fully operational, and we're still well short of the resources required to do the missions that the Department of Defense has asked us to do. Now, let's not forget the COVID pandemic. It hit when the Space Force was less than 6 months old, and it bogged us down for the first couple of years, but it did not stop us. The fact that we are here today at a conference for military service dedicated to space power is nothing less than a modern-day miracle. A miracle of hard work made possible by the unified effort of people who raised their hands by the thousands and said, I want to be a Guardian. I want to be part of this. I want to make a difference. And we are here today because of you, people like you who accepted the uncertainty of a novel endeavor, the challenge of breaking the old to forge something new. It wasn't easy then, and it isn't easy now. There are a lot of challenges we're still working through, but we are here. The Space Force is here. So let's take a breath. Not a long one, just a breath. We've done a lot. We should never let the fact of work yet to be done undermine the value of work accomplished. Truth be told, military services are never complete. They are always changing, improving, being tested, evolving to meet new challenges. But an interesting thing happened amidst all the work over the last 5 years. In the process of building a space service, I think we've also learned a lot about the people that are doing the building. I've always said that culture will take time, that it can't be downward directed. Rather, it has to emerge organically. Well, enough time has passed now that I think some things are starting to become clear. To my mind, there are 6 truths that have taken shape. Truths that define the Space Force and sketch the contours of Guardian identity. So I'd like to take this opportunity to share them all with you. Truth number 1, space matters. If you've been paying attention, you know that space has never been more vital to our nation, our national security, and its prosperity. At least half of the U.S. critical infrastructure depends on space. The Joint Force is sized with the assumption that military space power will be there as its backbone. It makes no sense to train for a day without space. It's simply inconceivable. We are no longer icing on the cake. We are the eggs in the batter of the cake. There's no extracting us anymore. In modern warfare, without space, kill chains do not close. Our strategic advantage evaporates and we lose. Truth number 2, because space matters, we must be prepared to defend it. Throughout history, wherever national interests collide, competition, crisis, and conflict inevitably follow. Our adversaries understand the importance of space power, and they are ready and willing to take it from us. If you need convincing, just take a look at Russia. They've got an eye-watering counterspace portfolio that includes direct-descent ASATs, co-orbitals, lasers, EW, you name it. When they invaded Ukraine, one of their opening moves was a cyber attack against a ground station, impacting their space data network. This is part of their playbook, and they will absolutely try to disrupt, degrade, and destroy U.S. capabilities. This is unacceptable. In short, what we have, we will fight to keep. That's why we've identified space control as one of our core functions. That was a mission that did not exist in its complete form before the Space Force. But now it's our top priority. The space domain is our responsibility, and we can test and control it to ensure freedom of action. That's why the Space Force exists. Truth number 3. Because space also matters to our adversaries, we must be ready to deny hostile space power. I'm sure most of the folks in the room understand why we call China our pacing challenge, but let me add a little color to that. Since 2022, China has launched over 400 satellites, half of which are designed to find, fix, track, and target objects on Earth. By 2029, China plans to launch a further 1,300 satellites to build out an exquisite communication and sensing architecture. There should be no doubt in your mind that China can and will use their space capability to hold the joint and combined force at risk. All the aircraft and naval vessels in the world can only do so much when they're targeted before they can even reach theater. It's our job to make sure that doesn't happen. Taken as a collective, these first 3 truths explain why the Space Force exists and what it must do. They also explain the rationale behind something I consider to be one of our most significant accomplishments to date, the Space Force generation model. Space Force generation draws a line between the force-enabling services provided by our predecessor, Air Force Space Command, and the warfighting capability presented by the Space Force. The concept is simple, but it's the shift in thinking that really makes the difference. Before, our focus was on providing consistent services from a benign environment. There was little time or need for advanced training, little time to develop tactics against realistic threats, very little time to build readiness. As of July, we've completely shifted that thinking to fully implement a force generation model that can meet the demands of our nation, a model that prepares Guardians to excel in a warfighting domain. From the headquarters to the Delta down to the crew level, this required an incredible amount of work in planning, building processes, and execution. Finally, after 5 years, we can say that the Space Force is a full-scale, cross-squadron force provider ready and able to employ space power under the authority of the combatant commanders. We're going to continue to refine our implementation of Space Force generation, and we're still learning lessons for future cycles. But let's not forget that we have something now that we didn't have before. Making something from nothing, especially something as crucial as warfighting readiness, is an outstanding accomplishment. If the first three truths dealt with what the Space Force does, then the next three explain who the guardians of the Space Force are. Truth number 4, space is a warfighting domain. Let me say that another way. The Space Force is a military service, not a support element. And there's a stark difference between those two things. The operational concepts, training, TTPs, equipment required for the one are entirely different from those required by the other. Why does this matter? It's because the way you think about something informs how you engage with it. Space is a geographic region that the Unified Command Plan defines from 100 kilometers out to infinity. And it's increasingly populated by other nations, commercial entities, civil agencies, academic institutions, and so on. If Guardians just provide support functions, we have no responsibility to these other entities, no responsibility to do anything about the region. We would simply operate within it, deliver effects day in and day out. If space is a warfighting domain, though, and we are a military service dedicated to it, well, then Guardians have an obligation to contest and control that region, making it safe, secure, and stable, in order to ensure that all like-minded nations can continue to use it for the myriad of peaceful activities that we've come to count on. To preserve and enforce norms for the responsible use of the domain so that it remains open to us indefinitely. It is the Guardian's job to see space as a warfighting domain so that we are prepared to secure it and thereby ensure it remains peaceful. And Truth 5 builds on this point. The Space Force organizes, trains, and equips, but also conducts warfighting operations as an integral part of the joint force. You will hear people say that services are OT&E and combatant commands fight wars. And this is really just an oversimplification of headquarters responsibilities. Yes, the service headquarters is responsible for OT&E, and the combatant command headquarters is responsible for executing warfighting authorities necessary for planning, synchronizing, and directing operations. But who actually fights the wars? The services' units of actions aligned under service components. Organizations that operate under the authority of combatant commanders, but remain part of the service. And why does this matter? Because the service responsible for contesting and controlling a domain is the one that knows how best to fight in that domain. It is the service component that writes tactics, builds CONOPS, gains and maintains space superiority. Guardians are warfighters, not simply force providers. To think otherwise sacrifices the credibility and gravity we need to properly carry out our service-level responsibilities. To interact with the authority among our joint and combined force counterparts, to sit at the table and make ourselves heard so that space will be effectively integrated into the joint concepts, organizations, and activities. This is another one of those things that older services take for granted. But can you imagine telling a Marine that they're not a warfighter, that the Marine Corps is just a force provider? Absolutely not. Every Marine or rifleman, after all. You are warfighters, whether you carry a gun or not. In accordance with the law and at the direction of the President, you are trained and expected to carry out offensive and defensive actions against military forces of other countries or support other military elements that do. When you're in a combat squadron, you're the first line of defense for conflict in space, and your actions directly impact lives on the ground in and out of harm's way. So stand tall, walk proudly, because you carry a heavy responsibility. And Truth 6 brings it home. Not only are Guardians warfighters in space, Guardians are the only warfighters with the unique, career-long, specific training and education and experience required to achieve space superiority. You know, almost every other military service has an aviator of some type. But if a combatant commander wants air superiority in the AOR, they rely on the airmen of the U.S. Air Force. Why? Because the service focuses on it. U.S. Air Force airmen have the greatest depth of expertise, experience, operational concepts, the necessary equipment to achieve theater-wide air superiority. The same is true for space. If you want to win a war in space, you had better be leaning on Guardians to get that done. That is precisely because there is no one better suited. Other services have space operators, and they certainly contribute to the fight in space. They certainly have equity in the domain. but only the Space Force grows its guardians from day one to be space warfighters. That's what we are. Guardians are the preeminent space warfighters with the knowledge and training necessary to achieve U.S. military objectives in the domain. And building out the educational pathways requires us to ensure that this remains true. We created specific service PME at Johns Hopkins University. We've revised BMT to build space-minded enlisted guardians. And we stood up the officer training course to produce officers with a broad awareness of all the disciplines of space power. The reason for all these initiatives was to institutionalize these truths, to instill and reinforce the mindset, the understanding, and critical thinking required for guardians to thrive in the development and employment of space power. Breaking with our legacy roots and Air Force linkages was hard but necessary. And upon reflection, it has made both organizations stronger and more focused. In the fast-paced modern battlefield that stretches from seabed to geosynchronous orbit, it would be unfair to expect the institutions dedicated to training air domain professionals to also be responsible for developing the next generation of space domain experts. I cannot tell you how heavy of a lift this was, how much effort went into determining what was necessary, revising what was not, and orchestrating the work to bring that vision into being. Quite a lot was done. We built so far, it was carved out of hide with no additional people or resources. Just like with Space Force Gen, we made compromises and accepted risk to make progress. And the path has not always been smooth, but we're learning, we're iterating, and we will get better. That's what we need to build strong guardians. Strong guardians will continue to lay the foundation for the Space Force that our nation needs now and into the future. So why did I want to share these truths with you? It's because you're responsible for them. I've been defining these truths in the Notes app on my phone since I became the CSO. And I consult them before every major event to make sure I get my thoughts in order. Why was that necessary? Because I spent 29 years in the Air Force, and we didn't talk in this level of detail about space superiority, ever. I have to overcome this DNA and retrain myself. And I'm committed to making the Guardian experience of today different, focused on these truths, not ignoring them. But it's your work that drove these truths into the light, carved them into stone, forced them into the core of the Guardian identity. These truths form a common thread among us, something to rally around, unify behind, and build upon for generations to come. They connect us, regardless of our backgrounds or positions, as part of something far bigger than ourselves. It is through your efforts that these truths become so obvious as to be self-evident. And over time, I fully expect that future Guardians will take these core truths for granted, just as service members in the other services do. And that's a good thing. That's the maturing process. But for the moment, let's remember that these foundational truths we can't take them for granted. You've worked for them. You've made them real. So it's only right that you take this moment to recognize that you have laid the foundations of our culture. My hope is not that you will learn these truths word for word, but rather that you will think about them, wrestle with them, internalize them. These truths explain why we need a Space Force. They explain what it means to be a Guardian, our role and purpose. If these truths live in your head, inform your actions, shape your thinking, then we will be unified as never before. I want you to be unapologetic about these truths. So I'm trusting you to speak up if you hear something that contradicts them. You are the Space Force's best advocates. We still have a lot of education to do. Even within our service, there are people who don't fully understand. That's natural, but that's the only way we're going to make progress, is if we embody our Guardian identity and act as one. I am so proud to be a Guardian because you have made being a Guardian into something special. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but in this time of reflection, I hope you take a moment to recognize your own hard work, to celebrate the work of your colleagues. Be proud. You should be. You've earned the right. Thank you. Semper Supra.
We're working.
I said now the hard part.
Well, it's good to be back. It's good to be back on stage with you.
It's very good. Thank you.
let's talk about this non-disclosure agreement for a second.
No, let's not.
So,
It's not.
one of the risks of you sharing your remarks with me is now I know what's coming, right? So I dug it up. And I think I could give the Space Force a pretty good budget boost if I was willing to do a little fundraiser about whether I should keep it or tear it up. But the statute of limitations is probably still in effect, so
Yeah,
I'll
exactly.
just tuck this away.
Good, thank you.
But I do have one more bone to pick with you. So most of you know your chief is a historian. And I think we at least need a footnote to the Founding Fathers if we're going to start talking about truths being self-evident. Is that not a thing?
We hold these Space Force truths to be self-evident that
Yeah,
All
at
guardians
least a footnote.
it's fair. It's fair.
All right. I was nervous that you were going to come up with some way to weasel out of that, and I was prepared if I needed a challenge flag there, but we'll let it go. All right. So last year we did this, and we talked about let's pulse the field for questions, and that went pretty well. But we said, all right, how do we make this a little bit better? And it came upon the two of us that Space Force been in existence for 5 years, and although a pretty public endeavor, there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes. And so the intent for our back and forth this morning was to hopefully kind of peel back that curtain a little bit for those of you that wouldn't have seen some of the behind the scenes, both historically and as we move forward into 2025. So as we kick this off, why don't you give us what either is your favorite or one of the ones that you think is most influential behind the scenes moment over the last 5 years that maybe most of these folks are not aware of?
Well, the behind the scenes work that I think about, playing out in the Pentagon is never that exciting.
Yeah,
fun,
I don't think that's where to go.
Yeah, right. But it is noteworthy to think about a couple of things that are behind the scenes. One is, and I mentioned in the speech about things going too slow or the critique that we're not moving fast enough. And I just want you to know that every discussion I have in the Pentagon is about how we go faster. What waivers do we need? What policies do we need to set aside? It is a continual struggle. And just so everybody knows, our government was not designed to move fast, intentionally not designed to move fast. The Founding Fathers, of course, thought that was a strength, that things wouldn't move too quickly, that we would be more deliberate in how we proceeded. And so that means there's a lot of oversight. That means there's a lot of laws. There's a lot of policy and guidance. And something as simple as designing a uniform and getting it out to everybody as quickly as possible, it just takes time to work through all those wickets. And so I just take this opportunity to say that there's a lot of people working to go faster. It's just behind the scenes, there's a lot of lawyers involved, and there's a lot of policy that has to be hurdled. But one of the things I'm proud of, you guys may remember the Victus Nox launch from last year. This was one of those things, Mike Gutlein and I, when he first got into the job at SSC, we kind of had this idea, and it literally was just kind of sketched out on a napkin, if you will. Hey, what if we did X, Y, and Z? And Mike said, I think we can do that. And then I have no idea what happened, because it just kind of started at the grassroots level, and the next thing I know, we're launching a rocket and checking out a satellite in like 96 hours. So I really am very proud of how, when we have an idea, we give guidance and intent, how readily accepting the force is of doing the thousands of things behind the scenes that really put real operational capability into place, and it's fun to watch.
Very cool. So I flew here from a set of board meetings in Northern California, and as I was on the beginning of that flight, flew right over the top of an area that you and I used to work. Matter of fact, our first space operations assignment together at a base that's now closed and a facility that's now been razed to the ground, but at Onizuka Air Force Base. And one of the things, when we were there as very young space operators, space was a benign, very, very benign domain. Right? And so that meant we trained and we did things and we operated in a certain way. And since about 2010, we've had this drumbeat of space being congested, contested, and competitive. Shout out to a few policy folks who I think were in the Pentagon at the time that started. But that's been going for a while, and we still hear and see that. And I think at this point, we kind of run the risk of that sort of becoming just a phrase that rolls off and we don't truly think about it. And so now we're into this, the service stood up, warfighting domain, right? And that means some significant things. And, as I look at it, it seems to me that that's sort of at the core or the central premise of that fourth truth that you just talked about. And so talk to us about your perspective on the evolution of a domain to where it's imperative now that we focus on space as a warfighting organization, the United States Space Force, and how that differs from where we were before.
Yeah, the most telling evidence that this idea is really taking hold, I hear from the Navy. I was just talking to our friend Sam Paparo, who's the Indo-Pacific commander, and he will right out say, if we can't have space superiority, I won't be able to achieve my objectives in the Western Pacific. That's your U.S. Navy combatant commander, regional combatant commander, saying how important space superiority is to him. So I think our best PR comes from China and Russia. Every time somebody says, well, how much do we really need to invest? One of those countries does something incredibly irresponsible in space, and they say, okay, we get it. So I think our educational efforts in raising the awareness of what the threat is and how important space is there. Now it's a fight for resources and to make sure we buy the right equipment so that we can respond to it. And I think we're on that path. I think we certainly have all the right ideas, and now it's just about getting the resources. But it's organizations like this, it's industry partnering with us to figure out how we can work through the budget cycles to make sure that we have the resources lined up in a stable way so that we can continue to deliver the programs. But I'm happy that we have a force design that makes sense, that will contest the space, and now we're putting the resources in place so that in the next 4 to 5 years we'll start to deliver those capabilities.
All right, so I'm going to shuffle us around a little bit because you said something that keyed me to one of the other areas that I wanted to make sure we talk about, and that's another group of people that's here. It was, so at least for me, some of my early operations assignments where I learned the real value of a government industry team and how that's done right. And we've got some phenomenal industry partners. So can you elaborate a little bit more on your views of industry and commercial capability and how that influences the Space Force's way forward?
Yeah, I think there's kind of 3 ways to view that. First, how fast the industry is moving and producing unbelievable capabilities, whether it's launch, whether it's microsatellites, whether it's using different kinds of technology for fabrication and communication links. The industry is moving unbelievably fast. So now the challenge is on us. Can we grab it and take hold of it? And that's where I talk about the budget cycles are really tough because, when we have a great idea and we say this is exactly what we need, or somebody in industry says, I have this capability for you, you're 2 years from getting the first dollar to put against it. That's just the way the government cycles work. So how do we bridge that gap? How do we find some money in the near term so that we can keep programs moving? We're working hard. Secretary Kendall's been working hard to figure out if there's anything we can do within the law to move some money forward to really go after the technology that is in place. But the third one is kind of maybe a little more administrative, but I think it's going to really bear some fruit. I used to think about commercial space in just one big kind of bin, and when it gets described to me, it's kind of like, well, what is commercial space doing for you? You have to think about all of the different avenues that are of capabilities that the commercial sector can provide. There's the traditional industrial base where they build something and give it to the government, we buy it, and now it's ours, government owned. There's also services. We could just buy data, and we've thought about services in multiple different ways. And I think by breaking it up into these categories, we can be more precise with our talks with industry, saying, hey, we don't really want to own this. We would like you to do the analytical work, and we just want the product or the services. Or what are the data rights? Can we just have the data? We don't want to buy the infrastructure that builds it. How does that work? So going into new cost modeling and new structures to figure out how to get the most out of industry without using the traditional models.
All right, let's pivot to probably the largest group in here, and that's your people. Even after 5 years of doing this, and you sort of allude to it in your remarks, there's still a ton that has to be done. But there's a lot of accomplishments that have been going on, but there's a lot of work still to be done. And you even alluded to it. Ironically enough, I think if you went up to a Marine, a sailor, a soldier, an airman, a Coast Guardsman, they would all say there's still much to be done to evolve their service. It's sort of the world that we live in. But let's focus for a little bit on the personnel side of things, and talk to us about your views of integrating full-time and part-time guardians into the workforce and how that benefits you moving forward.
Yeah, we were really excited last year when we got the approval for the Space Force Personnel Management Act, which gives us the authority to, in a single component, to have both full-time and part-time workforce. That's groundbreaking in the Department of Defense. In fact, the other services are really looking closely at how successful we're going to be, because they see there's a lot of benefit to this. It kind of streamlines your ability to leverage your part-time force in ways that we haven't really done with the traditional reserve and guard model. So now, having said that, there's a lot of details, a lot of policies, still a lot of legislative things that need to be cleaned up. That's why it's not quite going as quickly as probably some of you in the field think it should, but we want to be deliberate and not hurt the people. So we start with our full-time people coming from the reserves, because we know how the full-time model works, and we just conducted the board, and our first several hundred reservists are going to come over. The next thing we do is we take the part-time billets and we start to array them across the force of where we think the part-time work could most benefit the Space Force. And this will be a different model. It's not a reserve model inside the Space Force. It's no, where can we get the most out of that experience and put them into our institutional force, the testers, the instructors, that kind of effort from our part-time team, not necessarily those 24/7 ops centers where we're doing ops on a recurring basis. So it's a different model, but we're really excited to see that. And I think by the end of 25, we'll have completely pulled in all of those part-time workforce, and we'll have a unified model in the Space Force.
Outstanding, great. All right, you've been up here a while, now you're in your comfort zone. I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit now. You have a room full, and it looks like even outside the room, full of people that have traveled here. Now, it's not hard to get people to Orlando, but they did travel here during the holiday season. I'm quite sure that all of their to-do lists are longer than their wish lists for the holiday season. Let's kind of talk about 2025. Let's talk about what big changes are in store for the service that these folks aren't tracking right now. Let's make their travel down here worthwhile.
That's a lot of pressure. I think the dance tomorrow night may be worth the price of admission. I don't know.
Did you say you were going to dance
no,
tomorrow
I did
night?
not
Is
say
that?
we were gonna
I think I heard that. Anybody else hear that?
Yeah,
don't make.
No. If you're waiting for that, you're going to wait all night. Yeah, 2025. So we have got a lot of irons in the fire. We were still in the good idea phase from what started in 2020 right up through last year, still trying to figure out exactly what service components look like. The Space Force generation model is in its first or second cycle. There's just a lot of things going on. And so what I really want to do in 2025 is more of the documentation of the lessons learned. We've got all the right pieces in place. I talk about our initiatives in 4 broad categories, from force design, force development, force generation, and force employment. And we have all of the components of each of those categories in place. They're working. Now I think we just got to get them right, document them, get the lessons learned, get the reps and sets so that we fully understand and can continue to refine what we've already got in place. My goal is that by the time I leave, there's some institutional inertia, not the least of which is documenting so that these processes that we are putting in place aren't personality-based. It's one thing that General Miller knows how Space Force generation works, but he's going to be replaced, and then his replacement is going to be replaced. So how are we getting the continuous improvement process through the Force Gen model? Well, some of that comes from the documentation. And so I can see 2025 being more about coming to closure on putting these ideas that we have in place. We've got to stand up Futures Command. We got to get into the enlisted training. We got to get the BMT right sized and in the right location. There's still some things that are going on, but I think we've started most of the good ideas, and now we just got to lock them in.
All right. I think you made Miller nervous somewhere. You're talking about replacing already, kind of thing, but
He's
that was
always
a big reveal.
he's always on the chopping block.
All right. So I want to go back to our people. Whoop, sorry. Your people.
Our people.
I'm the
Our
old
people.
retired guy now, sorry. But I have had the opportunity over the last couple of years to still interact with the young Guardians. And it's been awesome, whether it's at a war game, an exercise, concept summit. And last month I was at the Tactics Development Conference working with the teams that were there. And just in all honesty, blown away by the level of discussion, debate, argument, in order to put together tactics, techniques, and procedures that help us stay ahead of the adversary. Between officer, enlisted, civilian, all of your different field organizations represented, it was genuinely impressive. And I know for sure that Lieutenant LaCour and Lieutenant Saltzman were not having those kind of conversations when we were in all of their shoes. So what strikes me every time I'm lucky enough to be able to interact with all of this crowd is the energy and the enthusiasm that they bring to what it is they're doing. So can you talk about that a little bit?
I mean, first, I agree with you, and it's central to how we do things. If we can give them some guidance, give them the intent, give them the vision, and then let them run with it, they're unbelievably talented. They're unbelievable in critical thinking, pushing the envelopes. They don't bring the baggage that 35 years of doing this business brings. They're thinking about things in a fresh way, and that's what we need. And so that's really what I try to make sure the leadership team is doing, is not over-prescribe. Give them the tools, give them the resources, give them the venue, and then let them run with it, because these young Guardians are killing it. They're just killing it. So now, and then once they discover something and they say, we could be better if we had X, or if we weren't constrained by Y, now we jump back in and we say, okay, let us take that, let us see if we can pull those challenges off your plate and give you something else. So that's the interaction. Let them do the hard work of tactics development and operational concepts, and then our job is to give them the resources and overcome all those hurdles that are in the way.
Awesome. I think, if I'm not mistaken, you and Chief Bentavania had an opportunity actually to see the energy and enthusiasm in action recently.
Yeah, and the Guardians, what I like to do primarily is escape the Pentagon as much and as often as I can. And this is
I found the easy way out.
Yeah, you did. Quitter. Step one is just get away from the Pentagon. Step two is go out to see Guardians doing what Guardians do, and it's amazing. The esprit de corps is just fantastic in the field. And so it always just lightens the mood, lightens your heart. And I had an opportunity on Sunday to go out to Patrick and watch the opening salvos of Guardian Arena. And Guardian Arena is a showcase of competitive spirit, Guardian spirit, and it is amazing. And so what I thought we could do is, if I could just get Chief Bentavania up here.
You bet.
He'll tell us how Guardian Arena went this year, and we'll start to talk about it. Okay, Chief.
Hello? Yeah, can you hear me? So, sir, as you said, we were there on Sunday and got a chance to see just the amazing kind of spirit, right, and the enthusiasm of where we're for Guardian Arena number 2. So before we kind of talk about some results, I was going to maybe talk to the crowd a little bit, let them know. So, General Saltzman, after last year, kind of gave some direct feedback and say, hey, it was a phenomenal event for the first iteration, but let's make it better, right? Let's continue to evolve like many things we do in the service. So this year, we kind of had regional competitions where across the units of action, the deltas, and the field commands and service components, they had competitions to see teams who were going to be invited to Orlando, to Patrick, to get a chance to do this. So 46 teams are submitted, and only 35 teams were invited to come to Guardian Arena here. And those 35 teams of three-member teams, 105 competitors. And what I loved about it is that when we had a chance to talk to them at the opening ceremony, opening ceremony, it was military and civilian Guardians. They were airmen. We had allied partners. So the Guardian Arena, the teams reflected truly every single day what the Space Force does to get after the mission set. So it was exciting to see that. And the planners, Coach Adam and they were killing them. It was not easy. They did a great job. But after spending 2 days, Sunday and Monday with them, I did learn a couple things. So one thing I learned, a lot of Guardians talked about, we're primarily employed in place service, right? That's kind of how we're doing business. I think we need to get more sun lamps in the ops floors because running around in Florida sun, many of the Guardians were dying. There's a lot of lobsters running around SFA today. So we're going to have to talk about that. Their eyes were hurting. You talked about how, at basic military training, we have Guardian military training instructors, right, that are helping Guardians transition from civilian to right into the military service. And from Delta One, the Dominators were there, with MTI team. And the teams ran over 2 days several miles across many of the events. Sir, I think you noticed, they were running in step. Like, that's how proud they were. They're running in formation as a bunch of MTIs. So they're proud of that. They're proud of that. Also talked about, part of some of the challenges they had to go through was kind of think outside the box, think critically, how do you problem solve? And the Delta 9 Team Thunder, and one of the events, sir, when you saw they were pushing Humvees, how to do a Humvee push. That team rolls up, and Team Thunder, they're looking at the tire pressure. There was a soldier in the Humvee that had to steer it as they pushed it. They're asking how much they weighed, if they had lunch already. Like, that's really gonna get into thinking critically. Last night, I said we had 35 teams compete. Last night we had the final kind of barbecue at the beach house out of Patrick, which was sponsored by SFA, by the way. Thank you very much. It was a phenomenal event. But we kind of unveiled the top 5 teams last night when we were there. And so for the crowd, you can see it was broken down into different categories. We had the academics, which were questioning the Guardians about history and culture and war-fighting knowledge they had to go through. They had the Iron Strike, which was kind of a physical team competition they had to go through. And then the Round Robin, which was 7 stations that had both tactical problem sets and physical challenges. And then a final beach run. They had to run on a beach and then come back 1.5 miles back to Hangar C. So it was not easy, ladies and gentlemen, but these were the 5 top teams, sir, from the comp that we had. But we want to find out who the top 3 are. Okay. So let's see. So who was in 5th place? Satcom Cowboy. I think they were one of the winners last year. But it was close. It was close. All right, who we have? Who is the 4th place team? Who do we have? Oh, Lucky 13s. Good showing up. So this is how competitive it was. There was less than a 7-point difference between the 1st place team and the 4th place team. That's how tight it was. Talk about competitive endurance. They're phenomenal. All right, so those are the top 3 teams that we have left on the board. So we got the Radiation Nation, the Minutemen, and the Heisenbergs. So we can bring them up on stage? All right, teams, the Heisenbergs, the Minutemen, Radiation Nation, come up on stage if you're here. Sir, good to see you. It's good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Ma'am, good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. All right. You guys grouped in I lost my mic. You guys grouped in teams. All right, you ready to find out who came in 3rd place? Absolutely. Let's do it. All right. Let's see what we got. In 3rd for Guardian Arena was the Heisenbergs. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. Sir, you want to put that down? Thanks. There you go, man. Congratulations. Sorry. Oh. We didn't coordinate this before we started.
Okay.
Congratulations, sir.
Thank you.
All right, you got it in there. Thanks a lot. All right, 3rd place team. Congratulations. All right, so you ready to find out who came in 1st place? All right, 2 teams left. It was tough. I'm surprised you're still standing. They're nervous. Yeah, it was a big deal. Big deal. All right, so the winner of the 2024 Guardian Arena is Minutemen. Congratulations. Is this the second place? All right, so we had the Radiation Nation. I know you guys were fierce competitors. Congratulations. So we'll do second place?
All right, we're doing second.
Yes, sir. There you go. Thanks, Coach. There you go, man. Congratulations, sir. There you go, man. Congratulations. All right, first place team. Here we go. Here goes your swag.
All right.
Thanks. Oh, thanks. Congratulations. All right. All right, so I'm going to ask if we can maybe switch and put the Minutemen in the center. So, sir, you know, based on your guidance last year, now we have a traveling trophy that we're going to present to the team. It's kind of nice, isn't it? Yes. So, all right, sir, do you want to present the trophy to him?
Or you can hang on this for a year, then you got to defend it.
That's right. All right. All right. So, sir, if we could, I just want to go in a group photo with the poster that we signed. Thanks, teammates. Hopefully you have some leave from your leadership, let you take some time off. You just hold that? All right. All right, let's give all the winners and competitors a round of applause. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Thanks. All right, sir.